Alright guys, welcome to another video from XF Motorsports. Today we have a really special car in the shop. It's a 300ZX and it belongs to Sebastian. Sebastian has probably been the most regular customer in this shop ever since I opened. In fact, he's been helping me with quite a few other cars over here too. Just so that I could clear all the other cars out of the shop to bring this car in, because for this one we're going to be installing quite a few parts on it. Bigger turbos, downpipes, engine mounts, the whole wiring harness, and well, Sebastian's going to tell you more about the car and all the parts.
Yeah, so I own this car since 2002. I've put quite a bit of upgrades in this car, but the car needed serious overhaul of the engine and replacing all the parts that needed to be replaced. It's been in making for quite some time, and now it's the time to do it.
Yeah, and what was the power number the car is making right now?
When I dynoed the car, it was around 380 to the wheels.
That's quite a lot, and I've been driving this car.
That was on the stock turbos, right?
Yeah, this car, by the way, looks a little bit rough on the outside right now, but driving this car, it drives absolutely perfect. Extremely fun to drive, really quick actually. And I can't even imagine how much faster it's going to be with these bigger turbos.
It's going to make a big difference.
Hopefully.
Can't wait.
Okay, so starting off by showing you guys all the parts that we're going to be installing on this car. So the biggest upgrade is going to be the new Garrett 600 turbos. Right now the car is on stock turbos, so this is going to be a big difference. Along with the turbos, we're going to be putting on new downpipes. These are the engine mounts because, well, the engine is out. Might as well replace the engine mounts as well. The whole wiring harness for the car because, yeah, right now the wiring harness is not in the best condition, so might as well replace the whole thing when the engine's out. And also all the hoses, coolant hoses, all the hoses literally that we're going to be replacing. So now also showing you guys the car quickly. This, by the way, is not such an easy car to work on. It's well, first I got to figure out how to open the hood. Okay, so yeah, we've already been doing a little bit of work on the car because I guess I was a little too excited to start work on it, and we'll also figure out how to do some of this stuff. So yeah, this is the engine bay. We've removed the radiator and the fan shroud and a few of the turbo hoses, so right now it looks a little bit more open, but it's a really tight engine bay. The turbos actually sit somewhere down there, you can't even see them. The whole engine is literally just packed in here, so to literally do any work on it, the engine needs to come out, and that's what we're going to be getting to next, figuring out how to remove this engine. So we started off by removing a few things underneath the car, like the drive shaft, the exhaust, and well, that did not turn out that easy because the exhaust bolts on this car were so rusty that no one actually bothered to remove the exhaust from the bolts. They just cut the exhaust off and welded it back together in a new location. And at this point the exhaust had been cut and welded so many times that it basically had turned into one massive weld rather than an exhaust. So for the sake of keeping the tradition, we also cut the exhaust off rather than unbolting it and taking it off the proper way. Since we were getting rid of this exhaust anyways, it didn't really matter. And after that we got to removing the transmission. After the transmission and well, also all the other things that were linking the engine to the chassis were out of the way, it was finally time to remove the two engine mount bolts that were at the bottom, and then finally it was time to lower the car and start jacking up the engine from the top to take it out of the car. So finally, after a lot of hard work and after removing a ton of weird connectors and wires and stuff on this engine, is finally out of the car, and this was probably the hardest engine I think I've ever removed. What did you think, Sebastian? Easy job?
Crazy.
Yeah.
Look at this crazy wiring.
So now that the engine is out though, the next step is that, well, now everything is really accessible, so it's going to be really easy to change the entire wiring harness, getting to the turbos, changing those, and all the other parts that we needed to change on it. So that's really good. And if you're guessing what the weight of a 300ZX engine is, it's actually 276 kilograms. From this point on, thankfully, it was a little easier removing things just because everything was a lot easier to access when the engine was out of the car. So we started off by removing all the pulleys, timing belt, water pump, pretty much everything that was wear limited and like wears out over time we replaced on this engine, basically to give this engine a new life after this point. Now we didn't get into changing all the internals and basically rebuilding the entire engine because first of all, Sebastian's power goal was not that high that we needed to go with forged internals for this engine, and secondly, the internal condition of this engine was actually extremely good. It was a really new engine from inside, so we couldn't really justify taking it apart to rebuild it, but we still replaced all the things that we could replace from the outside to basically make it as new as possible going back together. So over the last few days when I was busy working on the manual E55 and all the other cars, Sebastian has gone all out on this engine. He's actually painted all the parts that need to be installed on this engine, cleaned everything extremely well, and all the extra parts that we needed to install, like the Heltec ECU, some of the vacuum lines, and yeah, basically everything is here. So now it's finally time to start putting this engine together with the new turbos, new injectors, new timing belt, water pump, pretty much everything new, and then see how well it goes. So after that, it was a bit more disassembling to do to get to the cam seals and all the other seals that we needed to replace on the engine, and then putting all the new parts in. Okay, I missed a little bit of stuff on the engine on the 300ZX. Sebastian was working a little too fast while I wasn't recording, and he's already put the injector rail in with the bigger injectors, the valve covers which he's painted, and all the front covers that cover up the timing belt and everything, and it's looking really nice. So I guess not even that much work left on the engine now, just the valve covers, the manifold, then a million different vacuum hoses and figuring out what to do with them. And then my favorite part of it all, the turbos, putting the bigger turbos on, and the engine is pretty much going to be ready to go back in the car. So after that, there was some more putting back together to do, which Sebastian, of course, took his sweet time with putting everything back together. And of course I let him take his time because this was, after all, his childhood car, and it was pretty much his dream putting this car back together properly one day and then making proper power with it. But after the valve covers, intake manifold, and a few other things had been put in place, it was finally time to get to my favorite part, bolting on the bigger turbos. These were Garrett GT600. It's basically a turbo that, it's a turbo kit that Garrett makes for this 300ZX twin turbo, and it's basically pretty much the biggest turbos you can bolt onto this engine without making any significant modifications, like keeping the same exhaust manifold, same downpipes if you want to keep the same downpipes. And it is rated for 600 crank horsepower, which is 500, somewhere around 500 wheel horsepower. But we are going to be taking this car to the dyno really soon in the next video, and then of course we'll get to find out how much of that claim is actually true. So after a lot of work, here's how far we've gotten with the 300ZX engine. We have the turbos mounted, and we have all the things along with the turbo mounted, the boost solenoid mounted over here, all the vacuum lines. We've actually rerouted most of this vacuum stuff and gotten rid of quite a lot of the annoying features that Nissan came with on this engine, like the EGR at the back, a few of the crankcase ventilation hoses and stuff. Just simplified everything and gotten rid of a lot of the hoses and stuff over here. We actually deleted the high case, the four-wheel steering system that is, and of course all new wiring harness that we connected. Now one thing differently that we did that well, we had to modify the car a little bit for that, is that we actually mounted the wiring harness on the engine itself, and we are going to be putting the engine like this in the car, and then finally we will only have one last plug to connect. That is this one. This wire goes into the ECU, and this goes into another plug that goes to the engine. But the way Nissan actually do it is that they connect the wiring harness in the car first, and then they put the engine in the car, and then you have to go through all these million plugs and stuff and connect them all together, which is a ridiculous amount of work. This was actually the place where the wiring harness used to go in from, but it's really difficult putting the wiring harness in from there, and the way the wiring harness is routed on the chassis, it goes in behind those brake lines and everything, so it's impossible to actually take the wiring harness out without taking the engine out. So it's a really stupid way to do things. That's why we've changed all that. Now we're almost ready to put the engine back in the car. Right now the car is of course one-man drive, but later on, once the engine is going to be in here, it's hopefully going to be, how much horsepower you think, Sebastian?
I hope a lot.
Yeah, almost getting it. So after that, it was finally time to pick up the engine again and put it back in the car, and of course this time things went a lot smoother than they were when taking the engine out of the car, because there were no stuck bolts to deal with, there were no million vacuum lines and wiring harnesses routed in a weird way. So yeah, everything went back in fairly smooth. There was actually one broken bolt that still gave us trouble. It was for the transmission mount that we hadn't removed earlier, and of course that bolt was also stripped, so we had to weld on a bigger nut to that nut, and then turn that bigger nut to take that off. But luckily, yeah, we also managed to get that off and put the new transmission mount in, and after that everything else went smooth and we got the car done in no time at all. Here's a final look under the 300ZX after it's all back together. This is the exhaust, the new downpipes, new turbos of course over there, looking really clean now. All new exhaust, not like the old one that was cut and welded like a million times, and there was nowhere to remove it, so we also had to cut it off actually. And yeah, it goes back down. This is still the old exhaust. After this we didn't touch anything, but yeah, mainly all the important part is done. So now finally, after quite a lot of work, the Nissan 300ZX engine is back in. All the vacuum lines are connected, the wiring harness, well, transmission, drive shaft, everything. It's all in place. Well, the battery's not in place. But at this point we're waiting for a few parts. We are waiting for some new blow-off valves to come in because these ones were leaking. We are waiting for the battery harness to come in because that was also a little broken. So yeah, that's the only wait for now. In the next video we are going to be taking this car to the dyno. Actually here, yeah, these are the old dyno numbers. So on the stock turbos, on the previous time the car went to the dyno, it made 376 horsepower, running about 17 pounds of boost, I believe it was, or something. Yeah, close to 17 psi of boost. So now we have bigger turbos and we're going to be pushing probably the same boost. So it's going to be interesting to see what power numbers we see. On the previous run, of course, the issue was look at the massive torque drop off as the car goes above like 5,000 RPM. So we're hoping that hopefully with these bigger turbos, bigger injectors, everything, this whole drop off should be gone. We'll have more air, more fuel to put in if we need it, and hopefully expect bigger power numbers. Here's a quick look at what we are doing inside the car, but this is mostly going to be coming up for the next video. The Haltech installed and then tuning this thing, and then well, doing a bit of wiring work that is still left right now. I gotta wire these O2s, that is, well, the wide bands that are coming from the exhaust. Yeah, basically after that there's a bunch of tuning to do with the Haltech to make this engine run properly, but this is a mod I definitely recommend if you're doing any significant work on your engine. This is going to give you the extra control to actually get the most out of it. So yeah, a lot more coming on this one in the next video when we take this car to the dyno. What is it going to put down on the dyno?
If we can get 500 horsepower, I'm happy.
Wheel or crank?
Wheel, that would be nice. But
So
we'll
that's
see,
like 600
we'll
crank. That's like twice as what it, close to like twice what it made right now.
Yeah,
200 horsepower more.
We can do it. The turbos
More
are
than
rated
200.
for 600, so
Yeah.
let's push it up.
Yeah, I guess that's what we're gonna find out. Well, that's what you guys are gonna find out in the next video, how this car does on the dyno. That's everything for now. Thanks a lot for watching. See you in the next one.